Hey guys, tonight we drift back into the silk-draped shadows of ancient Rome. The torches flicker low, the wine is laced with something stronger than grapes, and the emperor at the head of the table is staring directly at you. His pupils are blown wide with power, lust, and probably something even darker. This is not a dinner invitation. This is a trap disguised as luxury, and your name for tonight is entertainment. You're about to attend one of Caligula's legendary banquets, a place where appetites never end, rules are optional, and your safest move might just be staying invisible. You probably won't survive this. If you're into this kind of soft-spoken time travel, tap like and hit subscribe. It's free and you're never stuck with it. And hey, if you're still awake when this ends, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I'm genuinely curious. Are we time traveling together at midnight? Or are you slipping into sleep in the middle of the afternoon? Now relax, stretch, breathe. You're safe here. Let's dim the torches and begin. You shuffle across the cool marble of the Palatine Hill Palace, where everything smells like roasted meat, jasmine oil, and sweaty anticipation. The music's distant, flutes, and something that might be a scream. In the grand atrium, there's a table long enough to seat 30 senators and all their mistresses, though tonight, there are just a few of Rome's most beautiful, richest, and most terrified. At the head sits Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, but nobody calls him that. You call him Caligula. Little Boots, cute nickname for a man who's just declared himself a living god. Cute like a scorpion in your bed sheets. He's 20-something, pretty in that sharp Roman way, clean-shaven, gold diadem tilted too casually on his brow, but his eyes, they twitch, just slightly, enough to remind you that inside that imperial skull is a storm of appetites no architect could ever design around. You're not sure if you're a guest or the next course. Across from him sits his sister Drusilla, lounging against silk pillows. Her smile is lazy, knowing, maybe because she already knows who's dying tonight. You've heard the rumors that Caligula calls her his wife in private, that she's pregnant, that she died suddenly right after a public falling out. Historians still argue whether their incest was a scandal or an invention, but you're pretty sure the way she strokes his arm means the truth was darker than either. There's laughter, but it's brittle. Wine flows freely, some of it tinted with exotic herbs, some of it tinted with, let's call them additives. Your cup's been refilled 3 times already and you've barely touched it. Smart. Then the entertainment begins. 2 men are brought in, slaves of course, from the far edges of the empire. Nubian, muscular, painted in gold dust. They don't speak. One of them has a chain around his neck with a scroll hanging from it. Caligula claps. A servant unrolls it. The scroll is a script for an asterisk act, one the men must now perform, on command. You turn away, but not fast enough. The act involves knives, body paint, and animal masks. You don't understand half of what's happening, but Caligula does. He's roaring with laughter. Drusilla claps. A senator vomits discreetly into his sleeve. When the scene ends, the performers are led away, or at least one is. The other doesn't rise. No one addresses this. And you realize something horrifying. This isn't a special night. This is Tuesday. Caligula was born into power, yes, but more than that. He was forged in trauma. His father Germanicus died under suspicious circumstances. His mother and brothers were either executed or exiled. Caligula was raised in the darkest, most paranoid wing of the imperial household. So by the time he took the throne at 24, he didn't crave stability. He craved reversal. He wanted to dominate the very people who once terrified him. And what better way to dominate than through humiliation? Take, for instance, his relationship with Incitatus, his horse. Oh, you've heard the joke, that he made his horse a senator. It's a meme now, but you're here, in the stables, and it's not that funny. The animal has a marble stall, purple blankets, even a team of slaves to feed him oats mixed with gold flakes. One version says Caligula planned to make Incitatus a consul, the highest office under emperor. Was it satire, madness, or a calculated insult to the entire Roman Senate? Either way, imagine being a lawmaker and knowing your competition is a horse. Now follow Caligula into his private garden just beyond the palace walls. Here, among the rose bushes and imported palms, he throws night games, an idea he stole from earlier emperors and twisted beyond recognition. The game: guests wear masks, they're assigned roles, you're a slave, your neighbor is a priestess, another is labeled Venus, and one unlucky man is dressed as Jupiter, king of gods, and thus Caligula's personal rival. The game never ends well for Jupiter. Under the moonlight, Caligula orchestrates scenes of seduction, mock weddings, orgies, public shaming. But his favorite part is the moment of reversal, when someone powerful is reduced to begging, whether through forced exposure, mock trials, or simple intoxication. Caligula revels in watching masks fall. Historians still argue whether these were actual events or wildly exaggerated by enemies after his death, but the palace's surviving architecture tells you. Someone paid for a rotating dining room ceiling that showered guests with flower petals and, occasionally, ashes. You don't build that for a tea party. Later that week, you're summoned to the theater, built just for Caligula's private amusement. A play is being staged, but it's not a tragedy, not a comedy. It's a reenactment of Caligula's own birth, with him played by a naked actor covered in gold leaf. You're made to applaud. Someone next to you claps too slow and is dragged out. You never see them again. Then, there's the brothel incident. Caligula, bored of the Senate's stubbornness, converts one of the palace wings into a public brothel. He assigns senators' wives to work there. Literally, men line up to see them, and the profits go directly to Caligula. Did it really happen? Some say yes, others argue it's libel from bitter historians. But the idea that an emperor could use your wife as state income feels terrifyingly on brand. And then, there's the time he declared war on Neptune, the god of the sea. He ordered troops to the shore, told them to stab the ocean with spears, and collect seashells as trophies. Was it insanity, or the most avant-garde power move in Roman history? Either way, the Senate clapped, because they had no choice. And now, you're back at the table. Another banquet, another round of games. The room is darker tonight. Caligula leans forward. He asks you, "Who do you love more, your sister or your god?" You say nothing. He laughs and reaches for the wine. The floor beneath your feet shifts from polished Roman marble to uneven, creaking wooden planks. The velvet and incense of Caligula's Rome fade into something damper, dimmer. You're no longer in a palace of power. You're in a room that smells like mildew, candle wax, and old bloodlines. Welcome to the birth chamber of Charles II of Spain, a royal baby so misshapen by inbreeding that even the midwives whispered prayers of confusion. You're standing beside a cradle that feels more like a reliquary. The baby in it gurgles, wheezes, and looks up with eyes that seem to be trying to escape his own skull. You're not looking at a child. You're looking at the cost of centuries of cousin marriage. This isn't an empire, it's a petri dish. You've heard of royal lineages keeping bloodlines pure, but nobody took it quite as far as the Habsburgs. The family tree of Charles II is less of a tree and more of a twig. His parents were uncle and niece. His grandparents, also close relatives. One scholar described the Habsburg gene pool as a circle with arms crossed. You know those cartoons where the king has a big chin? That's not a joke. The infamous Habsburg jaw, or mandibular prognathism, reached its zenith with Charles, his tongue too large for his mouth, his speech garbled, and eating often assisted. By age 5, Charles still hadn't learned to walk. By 10, he couldn't speak in full sentences, and yet they crowned him king. Because when a dynasty spends 200 years marrying itself, they're not about to admit biology beat them. You follow him now, older, crowned, and confused. Charles's adult life reads like a tragedy written by someone high on laudanum. His marriage to Marie-Louise of Orléans was meant to produce heirs, peace, and unity. It produced nothing. The poor girl, just 16 when she married him, cried for days upon arrival in Madrid. She'd been told she was marrying the King of Spain, not a man who looked and acted like a ghost raised on a cheese diet. Rumors spread quickly that Charles was impotent, cursed, or perhaps not even human. You're not sure which feels more accurate. Desperate for children and driven by superstition, Charles turned to, well, not medicine, not really. He invited exorcists, astrologers, and witch doctors to his court. One particularly memorable specialist instructed the queen to smear Charles's clothing with the blood of a black rooster at midnight. Another claimed a demon had lodged itself in Charles's digestive tract, hence his chronic stomach issues. Neither method worked. Surprise. Historians still argue whether Charles was mentally handicapped, neurologically damaged, or simply a victim of extreme Habsburg genetics. His autopsy noted his heart was the size of a peppercorn, his lungs corroded, his intestines gangrenous, and his head full of water. Again, not metaphors. But what makes Charles's story linger like mold in an old chapel is the way his sexuality was treated, not just privately, but politically. His inability to consummate his marriage became a national crisis. Ministers debated over bed linens, priests offered prayers, even ambassadors reported back to foreign courts with updates like, "No change in His Majesty's nighttime performance." Imagine your nocturnal struggles being part of international diplomacy. Eventually, Charles remarried, this time to Maria Anna of Neuburg, who had 23 siblings and was, by all accounts, fertile. But again, no children and no passion. She spent more time with her confessor than her husband. Charles, for his part, preferred his pet monkeys. No, really. One particularly large one sat with him during council meetings. It was said to hiss at visiting nobles. In case you're wondering if the Habsburgs were worried, nope. They blamed witchcraft. The entire Spanish court became a hive of paranoia, exorcisms, and whispered accusations. One friar claimed Charles's infertility came from a hexed relic sewn into his mattress. That mattress was burned, still no heir. One of Charles's favorite pastimes was visiting crypts, especially the Pantheon of Kings at El Escorial, where generations of Habsburg bones lie in gilded sarcophagi. He'd wander for hours, talking to the dead like they were old friends. Some say he asked his ancestors for advice. Others say he just listened, expecting them to speak. You don't feel so alone anymore, do you? The court, frustrated, embarrassed, collapsing, finally began preparing for Charles's death while he was still alive. They started grooming successors, they drafted treaties, they tried, carefully, to explain to the king that, well, maybe he shouldn't have been born. And Charles, so he agreed. He signed off on his own political extinction, because by then, even he knew, the Spanish Habsburg line had turned into something more grotesque than glorious. You watch him now, barely 40, slumped in a golden chair, surrounded by crucifixes and relics. He mutters something in Latin, maybe a prayer, maybe just nonsense. A priest sprinkles holy water, the queen cries without tears, and the monkey is gone. When he dies, they bury him with 3 golden crosses and a handful of strange herbs the last healer insisted would trap the demon. His throne goes to a Bourbon, and with the Spanish Empire quietly switches bloodlines. But you'll remember Charles, not because he was feared or loved or even really respected, but because he was the most tragic example of what happens when kings fall in love with their own bloodlines more than with their countries. And somewhere in a dark gallery of Spanish portraits, his long-jawed face still watches, blank, as if waiting for an answer you'll never quite find. The scent changes before the scenery does. The air grows coppery, burnt and sour, like metal and meat and wet earth left too long in the sun. You're no longer in the decadent decay of the Habsburg court. No, now you're somewhere darker, colder. You step out into a forest in Wallachia, modern-day Romania, but this isn't a scenic nature walk, not unless your idea of relaxation includes human torsos nailed to trees. You're in the hunting grounds of Vlad III, better known as Vlad the Impaler, or if you want to get medieval marketable about it, Dracula. And tonight, he's feeling romantic. Not in the scented candle, slow jazz kind of way, in the I'll show you I care by feeding you to wolves sort of way. This is a man who took the idea of discipline and turned it into performance art. His enemies, staged, his punishments, sculptural, his love life, let's say, complicated. You arrive in Targoviste, his capital, on a fog-heavy morning. You can't see the city walls for the smoke. And that's not just battlefield debris, it's the odor of rot, a stench so thick you can taste it. A visiting Ottoman envoy once fainted at the gate. You're just trying to keep your footing. Lining the road into town are thousands of corpses, impaled, tall wooden stakes, each with a body sliding slowly down from the rear. The poles are long enough to avoid piercing vital organs. The point is not to kill fast. The point is suffering. And you thought you had commitment issues. But here's where it gets weirder. Some of those bodies, they're noblemen. Vlad wasn't just punishing his enemies. He was turning his own court into a test of loyalty. If you flinched, questioned, or so much as raised an eyebrow at his methods, you could end up decorating his front lawn. One story says Vlad invited dozens of local boyars, noblemen, to a feast, all very fine, toasts, laughter, food. Then he locked the doors, accused them of treason, and had them all impaled right outside the hall, with their families watching. The leftovers served to the dogs. No, not metaphorically. Historians still argue whether these tales are exaggerated by enemy accounts, especially Hungarian chroniclers. But the sheer consistency of these reports suggests something real, even if the numbers bloat with time. One letter claimed he impaled 20,000 people in a single campaign. Another says he enjoyed watching their twitching. You walk now through his inner chambers, stone walls, damp floors, a throne made of black wood, no tapestries, no warmth, just a portrait of the Virgin Mary, with eyes that follow you like she's judging your browser history. In one corner lies his personal journal, or what survives of it, blood-stained, written in a mix of Latin and Slavic script, and among the notes on taxes and campaigns you see something stranger. A list of names followed by descriptions. You read one, Anna, eyes like snow, spine still intact. These aren't battle notes, they're mementos, souvenirs of women he's known, some lovers, some enemies, some both. One tale describes a concubine who lied about being pregnant. Vlad ordered her to be cut open to prove it. She wasn't. He wrote about it in poetry. And yet, somehow, locals adored him. Why? Because he was efficient. He kept the roads safe. He punished thieves so brutally that merchants could leave bags of gold unattended overnight and find them untouched. That's the duality of Vlad, part protector, part monster. At dinner, he's known to eat beside impaled victims. One monk claims to have seen him dip his bread in their blood. Vlad told him, "If it offends you, look away." You consider leaving, but the door creaks open. A woman enters. She's tall, pale, with a high collar of black velvet and a neck so thin it seems designed to snap. She speaks in whispers, so soft you have to lean in. She is Vlad's second wife. You didn't know he had one? That's because she doesn't exist in most mainstream histories. But some say he married a noble woman from the Transylvanian Saxon communities. Blonde, clever, politically connected, her name lost to time. Others insist it was a forced marriage, that she was a hostage, gifted by rival lords trying to avoid impalement. The truth? Historians still debate her very existence. Some documents call her a queen, others a concubine. One folktale says she threw herself from a castle tower to escape him. Her body was never found. You wonder if she was the one in the poem. She wept like wine. She screamed like rust. She never learned to kneel. Romanticized now, sure, but in Vlad's time, women in his court weren't wives. They were tools. Tools to forge alliances, breed heirs, or distract enemies. And yet, behind his terrifying exterior was a man obsessed with religious purity. He prayed constantly, donated to monasteries, demanded his court fast on holy days. He believed deeply that his punishments were holy, cleansing sin through fire, stake, and silence. Imagine being executed by someone who believes he's saving your soul. And so, we return to the forest. You're not alone anymore. You're walking with Vlad himself on a quiet inspection. He stops to examine a dying man on a stake. He touches the man's forehead. He whispers, "This is mercy. I could have done worse." Then he turns to you and asks, "Have you sinned today?" What's the right answer? You never find out. The forest swallows his figure like smoke. All that remains is the sound of buzzing flies and a wind that smells like iron. You blink and the forest dissolves. The mountains of Wallachia recede into green hills, flat meadows, and an uncomfortable scent of wet wool and soap. You're inside a palace again, but this one is louder, cleaner, somehow more surgical. The tapestries are English, the corridors smell of roast goose, and the guards are wearing tights. You're in Tudor England, and you're now walking beside a man whose every breath could change the future. He's large, loud, smelling faintly of leather, wine, and the blood of former wives. You know him, of course you do. King Henry VIII. And no, he's not eating a turkey leg right now, but give it 5 minutes. This is a man who made marriage a government department, turned lust into legislature, and converted his midlife crisis into a global schism. The year is somewhere between wife number 2 and wife number 3. You're standing just outside his bedchamber, technically a privy chamber, a term that somehow manages to sound both regal and suspicious. The air is full of lavender, not because it's romantic, but because they're trying to mask infection. You see, the king has a wound on his leg, it won't heal, and beneath all the satin and power, there's a growing rot, which, ironically, matches his romantic history pretty well. Right now, his second wife, Anne Boleyn, is inside the chamber, pacing. She's young, intelligent, and trapped in a gilded cage. When Henry first met her, he was obsessed. Poems, letters, whispered gifts. But now she's failed to deliver a male heir. That's a death sentence. And she knows it. You look around. The walls are covered in tapestries of virtue, fertility, lions, symbolism so heavy you almost trip over it. This isn't just a love story. This is dynastic anxiety in tights. Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had given him a daughter, Mary, but no son. And after nearly 20 years of marriage, Henry had decided to invent a solution, an annulment, one that the Pope wouldn't grant. So naturally, Henry declared the Pope irrelevant and created the Church of England, just so he could remarry. That's right, the Anglican Church exists because one man wanted to sleep with someone new. And yet, he wasn't done yet. Because Anne Boleyn, the woman he moved heaven, earth, and Rome to be with, was now in danger herself. She'd miscarried. The baby might have been male. Historians still argue whether the fetus even existed, but Henry took it as a sign that God didn't approve. And when a Tudor king thinks God is against you, you're out. Within months, Anne was accused of adultery, with multiple men, including her own brother. Was it true? Probably not. But truth mattered less than narrative, and Henry was a master of controlling that. You peek through a slit in the chamber door. Henry's reclining, goblet in hand. He's not fat yet. That comes later. For now, he's just powerful, with eyes that flick between flirtation and threat without moving a muscle. A new woman has caught his eye. Jane Seymour. She's soft-spoken, blonde, the opposite of Anne, and she's playing the game much smarter. No flashy declarations, no demanding letters, just quiet, perfect obedience, the kind that makes Henry feel like God's plan is working again. And so he arranges for Anne's execution. Not privately, publicly, spectacularly, by French sword no less. He wanted her death to be swift, clean, and exotic, as if he were saying, "Even in death I give you theater." And the very next day, he marries Jane. You want to ask, was this love? Was this desperation? Was this a man trying to outrun his own mortality? Probably all three. Jane gives him what he wants, a son, Edward, but she dies shortly after childbirth, and Henry, heartbroken, mourns her more than any other wife. You follow him to the chapel where he kneels, tears dripping onto marble. For a second, you see the boy and the king, the lonely aging man who just wanted someone to be loyal and fertile in equal measure. It doesn't last. Soon, he's back on the marriage hunt. Anne of Cleves is next, chosen based on a flattering painting by Hans Holbein. When she arrives, Henry recoils. She looks like a horse, he reportedly said. Historians still argue what she actually looked like. Some say she was simply German. They never consummate the marriage. He annuls it. But weirdly, she survives, becomes the king's sister, gets a nice allowance, and outlives everyone. Smart girl. Next comes Catherine Howard, cousin of Anne Boleyn. Young, reckless, probably in love with someone else. She's caught being unfaithful, and Henry, now obese, ulcer-ridden, and paranoid, has her executed too. It's said her last words were, "I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Thomas Culpeper." Ouch. And finally, Catherine Parr, the nurse wife, intelligent, older, kind. She outlives Henry, just barely. You watch him now in his final days, pale, bloated, wheeled from room to room like a statue gone soft. His leg is gangrenous, his breath smells like rot, but he still signs edicts, still commands, still marries, still rules. Because to Henry, love was just another throne, another tool, another battlefield. And you start to see the pattern. He wasn't just chasing affection. He was chasing immortality. Every annulment, every marriage, every heir, it was about beating death, about outlasting time, about being remembered. And guess what? It worked. We still talk about him. We still list the wives. And somewhere in the echo of cathedral bells, you swear you hear a voice whispering, "Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived." You're still in a palace, but this one feels wrong. The ceiling's too low, the curtains are too bright, the art is too French, everything seems half-finished and half-forgotten, like someone tried to copy Versailles using instructions translated poorly from Latin. You're in 18th century Denmark, walking through the gilded cage of Christian VII, a king so neglected by history you almost pity him, until you hear what he's doing behind the door you're about to pass. It's not a war council, it's not a love affair, it's not even a feast. He's alone, and he's clapping. You pause. No music, just the sound of rapid, repetitive applause. It echoes strangely off the mirrored walls. You've just stumbled into the reign of Europe's most unpredictable monarch, a king whose childhood traumas, compulsive behaviors, and overwhelming loneliness created a court filled with whispers, pity, and dread. You'd think the story would be boring. Denmark? Really? But no. This is a man who reportedly masturbated so compulsively that his doctors worried he'd go blind. He didn't, but he did damage every relationship, every alliance, and every ounce of respect his kingdom tried to give him. Right now, he's 20, freshly married to his cousin, Caroline Matilda of Great Britain. She's beautiful, intelligent, and thoroughly unprepared for what awaits her in Copenhagen. On their wedding night, Christian reportedly ran around the palace naked, shouting, giggling, and occasionally slapping guests on the buttocks. By morning, Caroline knew. This was not a love story. This was a disaster in a crown. Christian wasn't evil. He wasn't cruel like Vlad or ruthless like Henry. He was broken, likely schizophrenic, maybe autistic, certainly traumatized. He spoke in fragments. He lashed out at walls. He asked palace servants to spank him before meetings to improve his posture. And yet, Denmark still crowned him king, because what else could they do? You sit now at one of his breakfasts. He's chewing bread like it insulted his mother. Caroline sits across from him, stiff as ice. He tells her loudly about his night's dreams, how he defeated giants with a wooden spoon, how his manhood deserves its own crown. The queen does not laugh. And then, like a curse from a fairy tale, the door opens and in walks Johann Friedrich Struensee. He's a doctor, German, calm, precise, everything Christian is not. Within weeks, he becomes the king's favorite. Within months, he becomes the queen's lover. And within a year, he's ruling Denmark through Christian, issuing edicts, rewriting laws, launching reforms, all while quietly bedding the queen in secret rooms behind the library. The king doesn't notice or pretends not to. He spends most days playing with his dog, ordering marionette performances or pretending to be invisible. Not metaphorically. He would stand in the hallway and whisper, "You can't see me," as guards passed. Historians still debate whether Christian knew about the affair. Some say he approved. Others believe he truly didn't understand what was happening around him anymore. His grasp of reality had thinned to threads. But reality doesn't care if you notice it unraveling. Eventually, the court grew uneasy. A German doctor running the country, a queen sleeping around, a king babbling about ghosts. Something had to give. And so it did. A coup, silent, brutal, clean. Struensee was arrested in the middle of the night, dragged from the queen's bedchamber. They executed him in public, first his hand, then his head. Then they quartered his body and nailed the pieces to poles around Copenhagen. Caroline Matilda was banished, her children taken. She died of scarlet fever at 23. And Christian? He lived, longer than all of them. He was locked away in royal isolation, occasionally wheeled out for ceremonial gestures, signing treaties he didn't read, nodding at ambassadors he didn't understand. He became a ghost king, babbling about birds and clocks and how clouds were made of forgotten names. You walk past his last chamber. It smells like ink and lemons. There are hundreds of drawings pinned to the wall, doodles of knights, serpents, women, and always one small crown, sketched over and over again, a child's idea of monarchy, a reminder that no matter how fragile the man, the institution must wear a crown. One letter survives from Christian's final years. He writes, "I miss my dog. They told me I had a wife. I don't remember her face." And suddenly you realize something awful. You've spent this night walking through the halls of tyrants and monsters, laughing through the horror of their perversions and punishments. But this one, it just feels sad. You're cold again, not the kind of cold that wraps you in fur cloaks and royal dignity, but the kind that creeps under your nails and settles behind your ribs. Stone walls, flickering candlelight, the thick silence of centuries of sin soaked into the floorboards. You've entered the echoing corridors of Ivan IV, known lovingly by history as Ivan the Terrible, a nickname that honestly softens things a bit. Terrible in Old Russian meant formidable, awe-inspiring, but really it should have meant that guy who held a mass right after a massacre. Because Ivan didn't separate his faith from his brutality, he wrapped them around each other like a lover in a noose. You're in the Tsar's private chapel, not some grand public cathedral, but a small room dimly lit, fragrant with myrrh and blood. On one side, a dozen icons of Christ and the saints. On the other, a chair with iron restraints. You blink, that's not normal church furniture. Ivan believed that confession wasn't just spiritual, it was tactical. And if someone refused to confess, he helped them. Painfully. He once forced a boyar to fast for weeks in isolation, then summoned him to mass. The man collapsed during communion. Ivan whispered, "You are now pure," before ordering his execution. Fun fact, historians still argue if this actually happened, or was one of the many embellished accounts from surviving nobles trying to explain the trauma of serving under him. But honestly, you're standing here, and the atmosphere agrees. Ivan didn't do moderation. You walk now into his audience chamber, where he receives visitors, but he's not on the throne. He's on the floor, weeping. He does this sometimes, uncontrollably sobbing over his sins, clutching his beard, begging for God's forgiveness, and then 5 minutes later he's calmly signing torture orders. It's not performative, it's patterned. He believes God gave him this power because he's broken, that his violence is sanctified by his remorse. You've met kings who separated public life from private perversion. Ivan didn't. He melted them together into something that still pulses beneath the Kremlin walls. Let's talk about his wives. He had at least 8. Only the first 2 were officially recognized by the church. The rest were acquired like seasonal robes, kept until they displeased him, then quietly disposed of. His first wife, Anastasia Romanovna, was reportedly the only person who ever truly calmed him. When she died, perhaps poisoned, perhaps just ill, Ivan snapped. He blamed the boyars, he blamed the court, he blamed God. And that's when he created the Oprichnina, a kind of secret police in a state within a state whose job was to root out treason by inventing it. These were not subtle men. They dressed in black, rode black horses, carried dog heads and broomsticks, symbolizing their mission to sniff out and sweep away traitors. They tortured, impaled, flayed, and when they ran out of suspects, they created more. You're watching now as Ivan calls his second wife into the room. She's shaking. pale. She hasn't eaten in days. He accuses her of adultery on the basis of a bad dream. She tries to explain. He doesn't let her finish. The guards take her away. She's never seen again. And yet, despite this madness, Ivan was a genius. He reformed the military, created a standing army, centralized power. He commissioned the printing of books, sent ambassadors abroad, even established a postal system. He was functional, just horrifyingly so. Which brings us to that story, the one historians hate to talk about because no one wants it to be true. The time he killed his own son. It starts like this. Ivan visits his pregnant daughter-in-law. He sees her wearing clothes he deems immodest. She insists it's normal. He strikes her, hard enough to cause a miscarriage. His son, Ivan Ivanovich, storms in, furious. They argue, loudly, then comes the blow. The Tsar strikes his son in the head with his scepter. The boy crumples. For days, the elder Ivan weeps beside the bed, cries, screams, holds his son's hand. But the young Ivan dies. A painting exists, Ivan the Terrible and His Son by Ilya Repin. You may have seen it. Ivan, wide-eyed, horrified, holding the bleeding head of his dying heir. Historians debate the scene's accuracy, but that image, it lives in Russia's DNA. You walk past the door to Ivan's private bathhouse now. Don't imagine luxury, think medieval sauna built over a dungeon. There are iron hooks on the wall, not for towels. Legend says Ivan would bring girls here, not to seduce, but to test. If they didn't please him, they were drowned in the bath. Again, it's hard to verify. Some say it was propaganda by rival families. Others, survivors of the court, they whisper that the smell of vinegar and fear never left that room. And still, Ivan believed he was holy. He fasted before executions. He built St. Basil's Cathedral, yes, that one, the candy-colored domes in Moscow's Red Square. He supposedly blinded the architect afterwards so it could never be recreated. Probably false, but fitting. He wrote religious texts, poems, letters to the kings of Europe, full of vitriol and Bible quotes. He saw himself as a new David, a Solomon, a Russian Messiah wielding an axe. You follow him now to his final days. He's old, bent, paranoid beyond reason. He carries a staff not for walking, but for beating servants. He trusts no one. His fourth wife has been poisoned. His fifth mysteriously disappears. His sixth, it blurs together. He's playing chess when it happens. His last move is unfinished. They find him slumped forward, hand over the bishop. Some say he was poisoned. Others say his heart finally caved in. But either way, Russia exhaled and then collapsed into chaos. The man is gone. The throne is cold. But the fear, still breathing. Smoke, orange, the smell of burning lacquer and expensive cologne thickens in your throat before you even open your eyes. You're not in Russia anymore. You're not in a chapel or a throne room. You're in a villa on fire overlooking the crumbling remains of Nero's Rome. And somewhere in the chaos, the emperor himself is singing. Welcome to the age of marble masks and molten egos. You duck behind a cracked column. Above you, the sky glows red, not sunset, arson. The great fire of Rome is devouring entire neighborhoods, and while terrified citizens are throwing buckets of water at their livelihoods, the emperor is said to be watching from a safe distance, playing the lyre and wailing lyrics from the fall of Troy. Was he actually performing while his city burned? Historians still argue. Some say the story was cooked up by enemies. Others insist he set the fire himself to clear space for his dream project, a massive golden palace with an artificial lake in the middle of what used to be downtown Rome. Either way, you're here now, and Nero, well, he's just getting started. You pass beneath archways dripping with gold, walls covered in murals of nude gods mid-orgy, and a dining hall that rotates, literally, a rotating ceiling designed to sprinkle guests with flower petals and, depending on Nero's mood, maybe ash. There's a seat for you at the banquet tonight. You're not sure if you're honored or trapped. Nero isn't like other emperors. He's younger, slender. He has the unblinking stare of a man who hasn't been told no since childhood. He speaks in poetry. He cries easily. And when he smiles at you, It's like being kissed by a knife. Tonight's main course? A live performance, written, directed, and starring Nero himself. He calls it a tragedy. You watch him stumble through verses in a silk robe, face painted, voice cracking. Everyone claps, no one blinks. You clap too. He winks. The performance ends, the air grows thick, musicians take their cue, and the dining floor slowly rotates under your feet. Slaves bring trays of oysters, peacocks, roasted songbirds, and then the guests arrive. Not senators, not ambassadors, just young boys, dozens of them, dressed like cupids, painted gold. You've heard of Sporus, the boy Nero married after having him castrated. That's not gossip, that's Roman record. Nero insisted Sporus looked like his second wife, Poppaea Sabina, who died, possibly after Nero kicked her in the stomach while she was pregnant. Guilt? Nostalgia? Madness? Who knows? But he had the boy surgically altered, dressed him in Poppaea's clothes, and held a public marriage ceremony. You're there. The streets were lined with roses. Nero wore a veil. Sporus walked beside him, silent, face pale under white powder. No one stopped it. No one dared. One philosopher later said, it would have been better for Rome if Nero's father had married a rock. You're inclined to agree. But the story doesn't end there. Nero later married another man. This time, Nero played the bride. Dressed in full veil, he was given away by one of his freedmen in front of a laughing crowd. He described the ceremony as a celebration of divine union. And people cheered, or pretended to. Rome had become his stage, and perversion was applause. You move now through his private chambers. The walls are covered in erotic frescoes, not tasteful mythology, but vivid scenes of human-animal hybrids, obscure kinks you didn't even know existed, and what looks suspiciously like someone wrestling a dolphin. The palace was called the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. It wasn't a palace, it was an ego shrine, giant bronze statues of himself, ceilings inlaid with mother of pearl, fountains that whispered poetry. All of it built with the money that could have rebuilt the city after the fire. And you're starting to get the pattern. Every wife, every performance, every new architectural wonder, it's about control. Nero doesn't want love. He wants to become the myth while still alive. You hear him whisper it one night into Sporus's hair. I am a god. I am a muse. I am the end of time. He also fed Christians to lions, lit them on fire, called it nighttime illumination. Again, some scholars say these accounts were exaggerated after his death, but the sheer consistency of cruelty is hard to ignore. If it wasn't lions, it was crucifixion. If it wasn't crucifixion, it was mutilation. If not for religion, then for Nero's own amusement. You reach the final wing of the palace, quiet now, decaying. Nero stands in front of a mirror, singing softly to himself. He's bloated, sweaty, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. Rome has turned. The Senate has declared him a public enemy. Armies have marched. His allies have fled. Even Sporus has gone silent. And when they come for him, when the executioners are knocking at the villa gates, Nero cannot do it. He can't bring himself to die. He begs a servant to stab him. He dies with these words, "What an artist dies in me." And you realize, he never saw himself as a ruler. He saw himself as a work of art. Too bad most of it was painted in other people's blood. The marble melts into mist again. You exhale, expecting to be flung back into filth and fire, but instead the air grows cooler, sweeter, cleaner. There are swans, literally. You see one glide past a mirrored pond, wings folded like embroidered napkins. Welcome to Bavaria. You've stepped into the dream palace of Ludwig II, a man who made perversion look like poetry. This is no brutal butcher or raving executioner. Ludwig wouldn't know what to do with a guillotine if you handed it to him wrapped in velvet. No, Ludwig was delicate, ethereal, misunderstood, and utterly magnificently unfit to rule. But, oh, did he know how to fantasize? You walk now through the halls of Neuschwanstein, the fairy tale castle he built high in the Alps. It's what Disney's Cinderella castle was based on. Tourists call it magical. But you're not here as a tourist. You're here as a confidant. The first thing you notice, there are no political documents, no military maps, no courtly schedules. Only swan motifs, operatic murals, and full-scale oil paintings of Wagnerian gods in battle armor. You're in a fantasy RPG, sponsored by the Bavarian monarchy. Ludwig rarely held council meetings. He preferred midnight sleigh rides wrapped in furs, watching moonlight sparkle on the snow like crystallized sugar. Sometimes he didn't speak for days. Other times he recited Wagner's librettos by memory, tears in his eyes. His obsessions, opera, architecture, celibate, tragic love, and men. Lots of men. You pass by his private study, lavender curtains, golden crucifix, writing desk stacked with letters never sent. Love letters, often unsigned, often to the men in his court, tutors, footmen, actors, gentle yearning prose, all ending in spiritual agony. He never admitted to being gay, of course. It was 19th century Europe, but the paper trail of desire is thicker than the castle walls. He wrote once, "I can never marry. I was not made for the chains of the flesh. My love is pure, and therefore must remain unreal." Historians debate whether he ever acted on it. Some say he had discreet encounters with servants. Others claim he was celibate to the grave. But there's one story, the choir boy incident, that lingers like smoke. A young singer, gifted and angelic, was reportedly summoned for a private audience. He never spoke of what happened, but he never sang in public again. He joined a monastery, died before 25. Coincidence? Maybe. Now you descend into the mirrored hall beneath the castle, a secret passage that Ludwig had installed so he could walk unseen between rooms. The floor glimmers like ice. At the end of the hallway, his grotto. It's a fake cave, complete with a waterfall, a lake, colored lighting, and artificial fog. Ludwig had it built to simulate scenes from his favorite operas. Sometimes he would float alone on the lake in a swan boat, dressed in costume, whispering lines from Lohengrin. He once said, "Here I do not lie. Here I am allowed to exist." You think back to Ivan's torture chambers, Nero's gold-stained orgies, and suddenly this feels like perversion too, but not of lust, of reality. Ludwig ruled almost nothing. He lost wars, bankrupted the state-building theaters for people who no longer came. He avoided his ministers, dodged taxes, ignored revolts, but he built castles like dreams, empty ones. Eventually, they came for him. The court declared him insane. They sent doctors to observe from afar, with no interviews, just notes and gossip. Within weeks, they had the paperwork. Unfit to rule, they sent guards. And in a cruelly operatic twist, his own family signed off. Ludwig was taken to Berg Castle under surveillance. And 2 days later, he was found dead in the lake. Him and his doctor, both floating, no witnesses. The official story, suicide by drowning. But Ludwig was a strong swimmer, the lake was shallow. Historians still argue, was it murder, a cover-up, or one final theatrical curtain fall? His castles remain, ghostly, empty, theatrical, a monument to a man who built his kingdom not on soil, but on longing. You walk back through the halls one last time, past chandeliers made from antlers, portraits of knights and gods, painted ceilings so high you can hear your heartbeat echo. He left no children, no wife, no empire, just dreams no one else could afford to have. It smells like oranges, cologne, and something faintly unpleasant. Not blood, not incense, but overripe indulgence, the scent of someone who's never heard the word no and wouldn't care if he did. You've arrived in 20th century Egypt under the sweltering gaze of the Mediterranean sun. But you're not at the pyramids. You're not standing with the pharaohs. You're standing in front of a velvet-draped window, peering into the private world of King Farouk I, the last ruling king of Egypt and arguably its most flamboyantly unhinged. You've seen tyrants. You've seen obsessives. You've seen kings who married their sisters and sang during executions. Farouk ate the chandelier. Not figuratively. The story goes, one night Farouk wandered into his palace dining room mid-binge, already deep in a haze of caviar, roast meats, Turkish delight, and cocaine-laced soda, when he ordered his guards to bring him the chandelier. He didn't want it taken down. He wanted it on the table. They obeyed. He tried to bite it. He broke 2 teeth. And then he laughed. Because to Farouk, everything existed to be consumed. Food, women, power, attention, diamonds, dignity. It was all edible. You step into his private suite now. The ceilings are gold. Not painted gold. Gold-plated. The walls are covered in French wallpaper so thick you could lose a coin in it. There are mirrors on every surface. The floor, the bedposts, the ceilings, the doors. He wanted to see himself from every angle. And then there's the collection. You've seen odd royal hobbies, horses, books, swords, but Farouk took collecting to a new tier of unholy obsession. He owned over 50,000 stamps, more than 300 royal watches, a set of Napoleon's hair clippings, the world's largest collection of erotic postcards, and, this is not a joke, Winston Churchill's pocket watch, which he allegedly stole from Churchill's hotel room. Even his sexual appetite was catalogued like a museum archive. Farouk was known to import women like caviar, models, actresses, dancers, waitresses. No one was too glamorous or too plain. He'd see someone on the street, send a guard, and hours later she'd be eating grapes by his marble pool. His type? Virginity, or at least the performance of it. He believed he could sense a woman's purity, and he kept meticulous, grotesque records, names, details, dates, scores. One palace maid whispered he didn't want a woman, he wanted to ruin one. You step into his secret cinema now. Red velvet seats, thick drapes, popcorn machine imported from New York. He would screen American porn reels here, smuggled in disguised as historical documentaries. He made ministers watch with him. If they laughed at the wrong moment, they were dismissed. The projectionist once ran the same film 12 times because Farouk had fallen asleep mid-session and ordered no interruptions. He dreamed in technicolor lust. But like most men who feast endlessly, Farouk eventually began to rot from the inside. By the time he was 30, he was enormous, well over 300 pounds, wheezing, sweating, struggling to climb stairs in his own palace. His royal robes had to be custom fitted with elastic bands. One photographer joked his portraits had to be whitened sideways. And still, he demanded more. More gold, more sugar, more women, more anything. He once asked a royal physician if it was medically possible to eat peacocks. When told no, he replied, "Then you're not a real doctor." He believed in omens, but only the fun ones. He hired astrologers to choose his socks. He refused to look at cats, fearing they would steal his soul. And like many monarchs at the end of their line, he became terrified of death. Not spiritual death, irrelevance. So he staged public stunts, donated money to the poor, only to throw the coins from a balcony and laugh when people fought for them. He'd drive his convertible through Cairo markets, shirtless, eating ice cream, waving like a pharaoh whose empire consisted only of car horns and sunburns. One day, he crashed a car. Not his own, a stranger's. He'd seen a parked American car and wanted to drive it. When the owner refused, Farouk commandeered it at gunpoint. He smashed it into a fruit stall, then declared, "Too slow." He was out of control. And the people noticed. By the 1950s, Egypt was boiling. Poverty, corruption. The British still loomed like ghosts in the room. Farouk was partying while the country starved. He once imported a $20,000 cake while Cairo rationed bread. A military coup swept in, swift, clean, popular. Farouk was exiled, shipped to Italy, accompanied by 7 wives, 29 suitcases, 2 chefs, and his personal ice cream maker. And that should be the end of the story. But it isn't. Because even in exile, Farouk remained a king in his own mirror. He rented suites in Rome, drank, ate, flirted, watched his weight balloon into legend. Tourists would come to gawk. "There goes the fat king," they'd say. He smiled, waved, licked ice cream from his wrist. He died young, heart failure, collapsed in a restaurant after his 6th course. When the ambulance came, His stomach had already burst open under the strain of digestion. His final words? No one knows for sure. But his last order? Bring me the oysters again. There's no palace this time. No golden gate, no velvet throne, just a hotel lobby, a flashbulb, a Range Rover humming outside. You're not in ancient Rome or medieval Bavaria anymore. You're in the modern day, that strange blurry now where the robes are designer, the jewels are loaned, and the scandals break on Twitter before the palace can even draft a denial. Because guess what? The crown may be polished, but kings are still weird. You sit in a hotel cafe in Monaco sipping something overpriced, and behind you, a man in a designer tracksuit is loudly arguing with a maitre d'. You turn and realize you're looking at a royal. You see, the perversion never left the bloodline. It just got PR teams and VPNs. Take Prince Andrew, yes, that Prince Andrew, Duke of York, once a war hero, now not. Once celebrated for helicopter missions in the Falklands, he is now forever linked to Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaire pedophile with a private island, a black book full of secrets, and a Lolita Express flight log that still gives the world the creeps. Andrew insisted he didn't know anything, claimed he didn't sweat, literally. "I don't sweat," he said to a stunned BBC interviewer, referencing a woman who accused him of sexual misconduct. The public response? Global disbelief and memes. Was he criminal? Was he clueless? Historians will debate, but one thing's for sure. Kings used to hide their sins in dungeons. Now they do it in interviews with bad lighting. You walk now through Dubai's Royal Car Museum, an entire airport hangar filled with Lamborghinis, diamond-encrusted Jeeps, and custom-built golden Ferraris, all owned by a single prince whose Instagram looks more like a music video than a lineage. He posts shirtless desert selfies, poses with tigers, drinks coffee beside private jets. His father? One of the world's richest monarchs. His hobbies? Falcon racing. Lion cub cuddling. Owning entire shopping malls. He once bought an island, then got bored and bought another. No torture, no war, just a slow, luxurious corrosion of meaning. You think about Thailand, where King Vajiralongkorn, also known as Rama X, wears crop tops in German airports while ruling his kingdom from a 5-star hotel in Bavaria. He crowned his mistress official royal consort, posted the ceremony online, and then disappeared from public view while his country burned with protests. Then he revoked her title. Then he gave it back. Then he appointed his poodle to an officer position in the Air Force. Not a euphemism. Literally, a dog with a rank. The dog's name? Fufu. When Fufu died, he was given a full state funeral. You press your forehead to the glass of a quiet museum now, somewhere in Europe. Inside is a worn velvet jacket once worn by King Juan Carlos of Spain. At first, he seemed like the modern monarch prototype, charming, statesmanlike, a smooth bridge between dictatorship and democracy. Then came the scandals, the Swiss bank accounts, the elephant hunting trip during Spain's worst economic crisis, the phone taps, the mistresses, the whispered payments. He abdicated, quietly, gracefully, and then vanished to Abu Dhabi, like a magician exiting stage left. The press spun it as retirement, but the truth? He ran. Even now, the tabloids churn, the yachts, the models, the hush-hush settlements, not executions, not scandals carved in marble, just PDFs. It's all cleaner now, more hygienic. The blood has been scrubbed from the marble and replaced with non-disclosure agreements. But the hunger, still there. You think back to Caligula's banquets, Charles's inbreeding, Vlad's impalements, Henry's annulments, Christian's muttering, Ivan's holy rage, Nero's liars, Ludwig's castles, Farouk's belly. They were all trying, in their own damaged, grandiose ways, to fill a hole. Not in the state, in themselves. A hole they thought gold, flesh, applause, or violence could plug. And modern monarchs? They're still looking for the same fix. It just costs more, and is filtered in sepia Instagram presets. A crown doesn't cure insecurity, it magnifies it, it gives you a kingdom to project it onto. You look down. Your cup's empty. Outside, the sun is rising. A motorcade passes, flashy, pointless. The windows are tinted. Inside one of them, someone powerful is staring out, wondering if he's still relevant. The motorcade fades into the morning haze, and you're left with the quiet. Just you, the whisper of distant traffic, and the echo of 1,000 footsteps that once thundered through castles, palaces, and firelit halls. Let it settle now. Let all the gold flake away, the marble crack, the velvet decay. Underneath all of it, beneath the powdered wigs, the war drums, the silk sheets, and the censored headlines, was something so much simpler. Fear. Fear of death. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of being unchosen, unloved, unseen. And in men given too much power and too few consequences, that fear twisted into appetites. Grand, ugly, beautiful appetites. You saw them chase purity, punishment, performance. They rewrote religions for love. They cut open empires for heirs. They kissed boys and married ghosts. They burned cities and buried shame under chandeliers. And yet, when you close your eyes, what stays with you isn't the scandal. It's the silence afterward. The lonely banquet. The bloodless exile. The sleeping pill overdose in a Roman hotel. The empty thrones. Because no matter how many wives you marry, how many sons you execute, how many castles you fill with golden swans and secret letters, eventually the world moves on. You're not Caligula, you're not Henry, you're not Nero. You're just you. And your pillow is soft, and your room is dark, and the worst decision you made today was probably about snacks. So rest easy. Let their madness stay in the past. Let the ghosts pace their palaces alone tonight. You have nothing left to prove. Close your eyes now. History can wait till morning. Sweet dreams.